Why is dualism predicated on a huge mistake that has carried through the whole history of Western philosophy?
Dualism is the view that there are two substances in the world, two things, mind and matter, and that somehow mind perceives matter, it perceives the world. They are separate ontologically, as conceptually, but somehow they connect. When Heidegger addresses this problem, he doesn't do it in the traditional kinds of terms that I just used. I think that the key to understanding him is his idea of presence to hand and readiness to hand, and the primacy of readiness to hand. Present to hand is what we modern Westerners think of as simply the way things are. They sit out there and fill up space and time and nothing else. Readiness to hand is the object insofar as it has value. The only thing in philosophy that I know of that is like this final clause in Aristotle, where objects have certain values insofar as they are good for certain purposes or created by those purposes. The value then is in the object. But here in Heidegger it is much broader than that, and I don't think Heidegger has very much respect for the Aristotelian final clause. It comes from the active involvement or engagement of Dasein, that is human being, with the world. The world exists first as value-laden. The mountain that sits there as a chunk of matter or worldliness is not simply a volume filled with stuff. It is an obstacle in a path. It is a goal to be climbed. It is a piece of beauty to be looked at and enjoyed. It is all kinds of values, first, primordial. And then in Heidegger, we subtract from it those values and thus come to the present to hand. So that presence to hand is actually derived from readiness to hand, not readiness to hand, presence to hand. And I believe Heidegger refers to this as by saying that presence to hand is a deficient mode of readiness to hand. First of all, it is there in Dasein's active engagement with the world as a valueful object, and then we subtract the values and come up with the idea of the present to hand, which he thinks mistakenly we then put back into the object and try to imagine Dasein coming across something present to hand and adding value to it. That is dualism, as Heidegger understands it. And for him, it's wrong. An example of the relationship that Heidegger gives between the present to hand and the readiness to hand, ready to hand, is the idea of being broken. You start with the primordially given ready to hand, and then say a tool which has a certain value imbued in its being good for hammering would be the value that's in a hammer. But then we're to imagine the hammer breaking. Perhaps the handle breaks, so that it's no longer two-hand, Zoo-handle, ready to hand. It becomes now merely present to hand, sort of stupid. All I can do with it is kick it. Kind of like a car that doesn't work anymore. The first reaction is to kick it. It just sits there, being, but no longer good for anything, or, well, it is obviously somehow bad for something, but its presence to hand comes forward, and we now experience it as present to hand. And in this way, the present to hand is derived from the ready to hand. And this is an example, I suppose, at any rate, of what Heidegger means by presence to hand being a deficient mode of readiness to hand. Heidegger's attitude towards science is not that science is simply wrong or anything like that, but that it is a derivative activity. Science is a derivative activity that comes up with a purely theoretical view of the world, which it then superimposes back on the world, then imagines Dasein coming upon the world and tries to imagine how it can happen that Dasein knows the world. But in fact, according to Heidegger, Dasein was already there in the world, with being in the world before any of that happened. Of course, the world that Dasein was in, so to speak, was a world of readiness to hand. Everything was ready to hand in one way or another, either as an obstacle or as a source of food, or it was good for something, let's put it that way, or bad for something. And the Dasein was already there with it in a primordial unity, which is what he calls being in the world. Again, from that primordial unity, Dasein has the capacity to withdraw itself from the world and merely look at the world instead of using it or being engaged with it in some way. And that's what science is. Now, gravity, of course, is a scientific idea. And so the idea of gravity is for Heidegger derivative. Derivative in what sense? Well, gravity is the idea that all pieces of matter anywhere in the world attract each other with a certain force. It would be closer to the original primordial experience to say something like, well, to use the etymology of the word attract, that is, it's not just a motion of two bodies towards each other, but a real attraction in which, in Aristotle's terms, or in Old Greek terms, the two bodies experience a kind of love. I'm sorry if that sounds romantic or hideously old-fashioned, but that would be closer to what Heidegger thinks. Though I don't think Heidegger is saying that love makes the world go round or anything like that, but that the world is not simply matter in motion. The world can love, it can hate, it has all sorts of value-laden relations that are involved with motion. This is growth. Growth is a motion in Aristotle's terms, and growth is a much richer concept than mere gravitational attraction. So now, if we're trying to imagine this primordial unity of being in the world, in which the world is encountered as value-laden in myriad ways, and the presence of hand that is derived from that world, we can see that in order for presence to hand to emerge in that way, Dasein must have been already there in the world before it performed that feat of abstraction which led to presence to hand. So Dasein was already there in the world before we separate Dasein and the world and then try to figure out how to get them back together again. If we begin with the primordial unity of being in the world, according to Heidegger, we don't have the mind-body problem. We have the unity of Dasein and world, which he calls being in the world.
Oh